Hey, this is going to be a lesson about Quirks mode. So essentially what Quirks mode is, this is a reference to the technique used by web browsers for the sake of maintaining backwards compatibility. So for web pages that are designed for old web browsers and that allow them to comply with the newer web browsers. So how do web browsers determine which mode to use? For HTML documents, browsers use doc type at the beginning of the document to decide whether to handle it in Quirks mode or standards mode. So that's why we need to include the doc type, HTML, in the beginning of the document. Otherwise, you're going to go into Quirks mode. And if you do add it in, then you can stay in standard mode. To ensure that your page is full standards mode, make sure that your page includes a doc type, like in the example above. So that's why we need to include the doc type. And sometimes you'll also find that there is a difference between the Quirks mode and the standard mode. And sometimes when it comes to the styling and the page size. So essentially the doc type HTML indicates that this is HTML5, so that the browser is rendering out HTML5 code. And there's a full list of quirks within the Quirks mode that you can check out, Mozilla Developer Network. So I'll include the link in the next lesson. So there's miscellaneous and style issues. So you've got the orphaned list items and tables and a whole bunch of weird things that could possibly happen within the Quirks mode. So we've got the block and inline code, and one of them is that it doesn't handle the page size the same way. So we did have an example in one of our earlier examples when we were creating the game, and we've got the game screen, and if you're including the HTML docs, so what happens when you include it, you actually don't get the playable game area. And if you remove out the doc type.html, so if you go into Quirks mode, it's actually going to load the game, and then you can click the welcome message and you can drive the car in the game. So this is one of the lessons that we had in the earlier lessons, and the was functioning in Quirks mode. So there is a way to fix it and to get it back into standard mode so that it does work properly and as expected, and that's by adding in some styling values. And as mentioned, within the Quirks mode, when you are using some of the blocks and the inline layout, there are times that it's not going to get the right height calculations, and this is actually one of those instances when it's not getting the right height. So we need to set, and it's expecting a full height. So we're going to set the HTML, the body, and as well as the game element to have a height value. And the height value that we're going to apply is going to be 100 vertical height. So 100 vertical height. And also we're going to set a minimum height for it so that it's always going to take up at least 100 vertical height. So essentially what we're doing is to the main containers of the game that we're applying a minimum height to, and it's going to take up the full screen height, and that's going to force and allow us to be able to show the content that's inside. So when we add that in and we refresh, everything works as expected. And let's go ahead and add in and even try to remove out the doc type, and we'll see what happens. So again, going back into Quirks mode. So once we add that styling in, it doesn't matter whether we're in Quirks mode or standard mode, the code will all work the same way. And if you want to find out more about the Quirks mode, you can check out at the Mozilla Developer Network more information about how the doc type is handled within HTML5 documents.